What's up, guys? So today we have a question from Michael Brown who says, I'm curious, are you a user or were you? If so, was your preferred chem? I have it in my PSR that when I was a teenager, I sniffed coke for a couple years, which, has truth to it. I smoked weed, cannabis for, years, like who doesn't? But at the end of the day, it's really that's my drug history. I mean, I've tried a bunch of different stuff. I've tried, almost everything that I've sold. I've tried. I've never done like crack or meth or any of that kind of stuff. Just because, or heroin, like just because it's freaked me out. I already have an addictive personality. Like, you guys should see me go through coffee. It's nuts. So I already know who I am, and the fact that like I have that addictive personality, it's always something that I've been kind of hyper aware about, and I know it's a wicked vulnerability. So like I've never went near hard drugs like that. A lot of like party drugs, like I said, I've done X a couple of times. Shrooms, I've eaten a ton of shrooms. Never acid. Yeah, I mean, like recreationally on a regular basis, it's just been cannabis and alcohol. Before my indictment, I drank heavily, which is kind of normal. And then after, since I've gotten out of prison, I don't drink at all. I think I've drank twice since I've been out. It's like lost its interest for me. It's boring. I feel stupid when I drink. I'm not saying like people are stupid that drink. I'm just saying, like, in general, me personally, it's not something I do, and that's the reason for it. Like as far as like any other drug, like like powder cocaine, I sniffed, I think I was like probably 15 to 16. And then I snapped out of that because I realized it's going nowhere. And like I was doing B&Es to be able to pay for it, so it was like not a good thing. I wasn't in a good spot at that point in my life. So yeah, I'm not a user. I have no qualms with people who, do have substance abuse problems. It's a super hard thing to have to deal with, especially in a country that, will give you years in prison for having that, for putting something in your body. I don't think that those people should be subject to incarceration. I think it should be kind of like Oregon, where like if anything, they're going to, be offered treatment for it instead of, punishment. Like, they're not children, they're adults. And I think they should be treated as such by the state. But my political views are a whole nother topic. But yeah, no, I'm not a drug addict. Not really. I can't really say I've ever been one. Like I said, 14, 16, I sniffed coke, powder cocaine. So like, I guess you could say, technically I was, because that was like what I did. But yeah, just I don't have time for it anymore. Like being a family man will, for a lot of people, it'll snap you out of that. And like I didn't have a family until my early 20s, but even so, like, it definitely moved me away from it. Having stepdaughters, made me realize that like, you can't do that kind of crap, and that's why I had moved from like Mass and Rhode Island up to Vermont, aside from, getting away from Mass because I had warrants. But it was just getting out of like those areas where like, that kind of stuff is really predominant. You still have drug use everywhere. That doesn't change, but moving your scene, completely moving and re-engineering everything about you, like a clean slate, really helps, because you don't know, who those people are in that town who, are doing the things you were doing. So it's kind of a nice thing to be able to move to a place where no one knows you and kind of have that autonomy to be able to move around and do whatever you want and be who you want, kind of re-engineer yourself. And I've done that, every 2-3 years. I used to do that back as a teenager. And it was really nice, having that ability. I never really was one for like, born in this town, I'm gonna die in this town. Like I never really kind of had that patriotism, I guess you'd call it, you know, like, you know, the patriotism is kind of like that loyalty to real estate, you know. I never really had that, you know. In a Mass, you have like a lot of townie cliques, you have like a lot of like New Bedford guys, hate Fall River guys, and you know, you have that in county jail, you have it in the schools, and like Mass is really, you know, it has that really heavily going on. But yeah, so no, I would answer no to that. I guess like that's a really roundabout way of answering your question, but I hope I did, Michael Brown. Thank you for the question. I appreciate you leaving it.